Is a radio talk show host and Fox News contributor. Matt Schlapp is chairman of the American Conservative Union. Matt, I mean, the reports were that the Department of Homeland Security was blindsided by this executive order. But you just heard from Sean Spicer, who said multiple occasions the Department of Homeland Security and Secretary Kelly were briefed. They saw the language. Staffers made edits. This went through a very extensive staffing process, he said.
Yeah, I think that it's clear that the secretary was aware of it. Sometimes on these orders, there's a larger interagency staffing process that can take a while. I think what President Trump and his senior advisors felt, if they went too deep into the bureaucracy with this executive order language, that it would immediately get leaked in an attempt to stop it. And when you have an acting attorney general who clearly would have been somebody who would try to stop it, you can see with what she tried to do by not enforcing it, you can't blame them for wanting to be discreet in this area.
So I just shared with you the White House response and what Sean Spicer said. But, Richard, we also just heard from the secretary himself, Secretary Kelly, who said he knew about it, his department knew the order was coming, and that Homeland Security staffers were involved in drafting it, in his words.
Well, listen, I'll take the secretary at his word, but I mean, even though that is the case, I agree with Matt a little bit on this one, is that the bureaucracy and the folks who have to implement this law did not know, which is why there was so much, I wouldn't say confusion, I would say heartbreak at America's airports. Once again, this administration has failed to really communicate to its staff what needs to be done. Donald Trump is a businessman who has a multi-billion-dollar company. He should know how to do this. And unfortunately, what we saw this weekend is that he doesn't.
Was there a missed opportunity here, Matt, for this to have been rolled out better? I mean, what does Donald Trump, what does the president do as he looks back at this?
Look, I think having served in a White House for 4 years, you learn with everything you do what you can do better. And certainly there are things they could have done better. But let's face it, let's be honest. The hue and cry from across the press corps over the weekend was somewhat manufactured on all these horror cases. Now, there were people, I agree, who got caught up in the system because there was confusion, and I think that is regrettable. But the other piece of this is a disagreement on policy. There are 7 countries that Obama has identified are countries that are enriched with terrorists. They call them the T7, by the way, in commercial language. And you don't do business with these countries by and large. You really don't have any reason to travel there if you have commercial interests. And this policy is a 3-month review that these folks are vetting. And you know what? The American people are going to be with Donald Trump on this policy because it's going to help to keep us safe.
I mean, Secretary Kelly went to that point, Richard. He said this isn't a travel ban. He actually addressed the wording and the language that's being used. And certainly he said this is not a ban on Muslims, which has caused chaos, as we saw over the weekend. He said this is not, I repeat, not a ban on Muslims. Religious liberty is a fundamental treasured value, in the Secretary's words.
I think those are just words and not deeds. 100% of those individuals that were caught up at American airports this weekend and continue to not be able to travel to this country, whether they work for Google, whether they work for Coca-Cola, whether they are or they're track stars, they are all Muslim, which is why they're not being allowed back into the United States. I would call that
all jihadists,
a Muslim ban.
All jihadists are Muslims.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up, Matt.
Richard, finish your thought, and Matt, you'll respond. Richard, finish your thought.
I'm glad he brought that up because there's a lot of countries missing from the list that should be on the list. If Donald Trump really cared about stopping terrorism, then Saudi Arabia would be on the list. That's where Osama bin Laden is from. That's where Al-Qaeda was started.
Look, I think it's all about upholding our constitutional principles, and one of those is the fact that we get to determine who can come into America legally and who can't. And it's okay for us as a country to recognize the fact that we have a huge global problem with radical Islamic terrorists. And this is an understanding of when they use our freedoms against us, we are less secure. And we have to strike the balance, and I think this policy will.
All right. Well, this was about as contentious as that White House briefing that we just saw.
Oh, come on.
I mean, well, and I say that in the best possible way. It was constructive. There were certainly some questions answered.
We just
Thanks to both of
disagree,
you.
but I like Matt.
All right. Good to see you.